Good morning, everyone, and thank you to Balipara Foundation for giving me this opportunity. It's wonderful to see so many friends who we have met over the years at the forum, and also to see many new faces. I have with me a very eminent panel. Mr. Roy, you have already heard him speak, and we have two more very eminent speakers, leaders in their own field. So I would like to welcome them to the panel. Karishma tells me that I have until 11:10. So in the interest of time, I would like to request my panelists to be very crisp with their insights and with their answers. First of all, I think all of you have heard about the importance and the significance of the third pole as well as the Eastern Himalayas. So I think I would like to start my question on the biodiversity significance of the Eastern Himalayas. Many of us who are from the biodiversity sector know about the biodiversity elements of this region, but for many others, I think it would be very worthwhile enunciating that further. And who else other than Dr. Usha Lachunpa? Somebody over here said about the last mile. So I think she's been, who else other than coming from the state of Sikkim can really talk about how climate change has impacted a very biodiversity rich state like Sikkim, how it has impacted the biodiversity as well as the ecosystems. So to you, Dr. Lachunpa, I would like to ask you what makes the Eastern Himalayas so unique in terms of its species and ecosystems, and what makes them particularly vulnerable to environmental changes like climate change?
Hello everybody, I think you can hear me now. Thank you. When we talk about biodiversity, first of all, we all recognize that this Eastern Himalaya is a known biodiversity hotspot, and people normally feel very proud about being in a hotspot. But the very definition, if you go and see, it's a hotspot where most of the species are endangered and most of the species are threatened because of human beings. And this is a very rich biodiverse area. So a hotspot is something that we need to worry about. And in this hotspot, we find that the entire Northeast has a very special place. And what we have to look for is not just the megafauna that we always say, Himalaya, snow leopards, or right down to tigers and elephants and rhinos. We've got red pandas. We've got this array of wildlife, array of biodiversity occupying all the different layers that make up our mountains. But we've also got to focus on the lesser known animals, like maybe the snow toads in the high altitudes, the pollinators all around us, the reptiles and amphibians that are actually keeping our ecosystems alive. And these wild palms and wild cycads, these are prehistoric plants that we don't even know whether they exist anymore and how many of them really do exist. So, and when even we come to the domesticated animals, many of the wild relatives that we have of our domestic animals are there in our Eastern Himalayas. Like we've got the blue sheep, we've got the Tibetan argali, we've even got the animals, the ancestors of the domestic horses and asses. We've got the Kiang. Then right down also we've got almost all the animals that we see are our genetic reservoir in this place. We've got to actually see the kind of forests that we have that are keeping our communities alive in these areas. In the Eastern Himalayas, if we didn't have the kind of biodiversity that we have, we wouldn't have this kind of rich culture and diversity of traditional knowledge, the different languages we speak, the different foods that we eat. It's all a reflection of the richness of the Eastern Himalayas. And in this Eastern Himalaya, we also find, that this traditional based knowledge is also there in our agricultural systems. It's also equally a part of the Eastern Himalaya. And these agricultural systems are also of different types. We have like from the Tibetan plateau part of the Eastern Himalayas, we have a piece of it in Sikkim. We've got the agro-pastoral lifestyles. Right down, we've got all the different layers again. When we talk about mountains, it's like, climbing a ladder. And you start from the plains, and you start from the river valleys, and you end up climbing up to the Tibetan plateau just within 100 kilometers. The richness and the diversity of this region is too astounding. We've got cardamom-based agroforestry, we've got terraced rice fields, and a whole lot of diversity, domesticated, wild, coexist together. At this point, I'd like to say this much.
Thank you. And this is from the point of the biophysical elements. And I would like to ask you, Mr. Roy, your experience of working, especially on social impact issues. And like Dr. Usha has already said, it's also a land of diversity, it's a land of diverse people, of diverse practices in agriculture and everything else on natural resource management. So I think your foundation does a lot of work with the people. And as Usha said, everybody feels that when we say we have two biodiversity hotspots in the Eastern Himalayas, and the moment we say biodiversity hotspots, we only imagine the diversity of life. But biodiversity hotspot is also an area which is really threatened. From that point of view, I would also like to ask you, about the third pole also has a lot of people dependent on nature and natural resources. So, and from your work on the social impact, what do you think? What sort of impacts do you envision from the climate change impacts that is happening in our region?
So, thank you for the question. Let me begin by saying, I think just to add one point to what I said, I think the significance of the third pole is not just for the third pole, it's actually for the rest of the country and the rest of the region also. I think it makes a lot of sense to look at, how, irrespective of where you are in the country, to actually how you're grappling with the third pole and the issue here, because it's like at the genesis of many threats across the country. So that's one. Like you said, and like I was also speaking, I think the idea is how do you invert our own thinking to actually realize that the ultimate custodians of wisdom are already there. A lot of the species that you're talking about, etc. Sometimes, if I can be honest here, sometimes I find our process is a little wanting. Our conventional definition of what a program should be, what are our metrics. Sometimes I find a huge dissonance between our metrics, of success or impact and what the actual success or actual metric on the ground might look like. So maybe it boils down to some hard questions that we need to ask ourselves in this forums like these. Saying maybe our definitions of metric are fine, that's fine, that's okay. But maybe we're not actually talking about the real metrics and the real impacts, and that doesn't make us comfortable. And that therein lies the blind spot that you're talking about. If it is human apathy that is leading to the threat, then it has to be human action. And which is where most of our work is actually with individuals who are doing great things, and they also serve to really highlight blind spots which otherwise wouldn't have come up. Trust me, the snow toad that you're talking about is not going to come up through organizational agendas. It will only come up by recognizing the So that's where we are.
Thank you. The other thing also, I think, as we saw in the first video, that when we say third pole and Eastern Himalayas, just doesn't mean India. So it's a place which is regional in nature, and many countries are part of this region. So with that, I would like to ask you, Dr. Lobsang, what are some of the barriers of regional cooperation in this region? Because we need to cooperate regionally, be it in terms of government, scholars, communities, to some extent, Balipara actually, this forum brings in people from Bhutan, Nepal. What are some of the barriers which really, prevent that as a region to cooperate and make things happen on the ground?
Thank you very much for Balipara Foundation. What Balipara does is we always talk about think globally, act globally. Yes. They do that, and the organizers, traditional all the staff members have been very good, very meticulously organized. Now, what are the key issues facing third world? Perhaps I'm not an environmentalist. I have a PhD in law, yes, but I have only diploma in environmental law. So I just have a diploma, so my knowledge is limited. But because I wear a political hat and I represent the yes, Tibet, that's why I'm asked to speak here. There are four main challenges in the Tibet. One is mining. Second is the population transfer and urbanization. And third is damming. And the fourth is militarization. So these are the major challenges. Whereas mining, it is connected to water pollution. When you mine pools of lithium, that's right. You have to use a lot of water, a lot of chemicals, and pollutes the river. And that's, I think, Beijing interrupting my. So it pollutes the river. It affects downstream, right? And damming, again, we all know over the river, there are like 12 dams, they built, some say that, and at the major bend, the biggest dam built, and it is connected to earthquake, right? And then because Assam is a zone 5 seismic zone, in a sense, it's a very earthquake-prone area. And Assam should remember 1897 earthquake, 1950 earthquake, and because of damming, some say Sikkim earthquake of 2011, Nepal 2015, all these are connected. And then we all have to be cautious. Rather than the damming of rivers could divert rivers. It affects the fishery and agriculture downstream. And urbanization, there's a lot of Chinese people moving. It is very fragile. Its capacity is very limited. So hundreds of thousands of people moving there, and then it's reaching its capacity. So now regionally, so all the downstream countries should come together and make this as a local issue and say, look, whatever happens on the Tibet plateau affects us directly. Limit mining, limit damming, limit militarization, limit urbanization of the Tibet plateau. Because otherwise it will affect downstream. So, and then you can, raise it at the UNEP should take it as an issue. And COP29 has passed, and COP30 is coming. Regional coalition putting forth this argument is very, very important. Regionally, this is not just 8 countries which I see vote presence, but also you have to include all the countries in Southeast Asia that affects Salween River, Irrawaddy River, all of them forming a coalition and making a clear, I don't want to say demand, but a concern. What happens on the Tibet plateau, essentially is Tibet, affects all of us. Right? Because, if I may add, by 2050, world population will be 10 billion, of which 5.6 billion will be in Asia. Of the 5.6 billion, 60% will be in urban areas. They need water. And Tibet is the water tower of Asia. Right? What happens in the Tibet plateau affects flora and fauna, livelihood of millions of people downstream. So making a collective issue is very important.
Thank you, Dr. Lobsang. Continuing with the Tibetan plateau, I would also like to again ask Dr. Usha, especially what we are talking about in the third pole is also the melting of glaciers and how that is impacting biodiversity as well as the ecosystems of the region. So I would be really grateful if you could highlight, talk about your insights on this phenomenon, and I think it's really very, very visible in a small state like Sikkim, where you could, it's a lived-in experience for people coming from that region.
We've got everyone talking about icebergs and about glaciers, and just a small state. Sikkim is one of the smallest states of the country, we have about 320 documented glaciers, and of them 40, and all these are 100% moraine dam. That means any seismic activity, any disturbance could cause what we call the glacial lake outburst floods or BLOFs. And we faced this just last year, in the first week of October, when one of the glaciers in North Sikkim had faced this issue, and the massive damage that occurred, we are still not recovered from it. And the entire Teesta Valley, Teesta is the principal river of Sikkim. Sikkim is a sacred landscape for all of us. And in this sacred landscape, the river has been really, savagely has been ravaged, and with the damage downstream is still so unspeakable that people are now bringing the political part into it. West Bengal and Sikkim, it should be a common ground for talking about disasters like this. So when you face a disaster, you think of BLOF, and ice melt and decreasing, snow cover is one issue. Now, BLOF runs in the river valley where only that part of the river valley is disturbed. But when you talk about warming climates and you talk about decreasing snowfall, then you are affecting even the snow-fed lakes that are feeding and keeping alive. The capital of Sikkim is Gangtok. Another big city is Namchi. These all are getting water from snow melt. And when the snow and ice disappear or decrease, that's when we are going to have climate migration and all these issues that everybody talks about. And it's now in almost every speech this comes out. So when we talk about that, just one BLOF, one lake, and we had about how many millions of cubic meters of water lost in one day from 105 hectare area of the lake. Just that much. More than 5 billion cubic meters of water we lost, fresh water, which could have kept a lot of the state going, a lot of population downstream outside Sikkim, outside West Bengal alive. But talking of that, then we spoke about climate warming and how the natural springs that we call dharas, they need to be really focused upon, because our springs are dying with all the tunneling that's happening, all the road network that's happening in Sikkim. It's unwarranted kind of destruction. The price that we are paying is going to be faced by the next generation, and the next generation is going to have to tolerate things like forest fires. Right now we have forest fires in the lower altitudes of Sikkim, but sooner or later, with warming climate, this is going to reach the temperate and conifer forests, and that's going to be a real disaster. Along with that comes disease. Along with that come, we've got mosquitoes breeding, mosquitoes like Aedes aegypti and Culex fasciatus, which breed in bamboo clumps and have been documented as far back as 2008 in Darjeeling. So disease rise, malaria, dengue, that is happening. Invasive alien species are going higher and higher every year. Not just plants, but even giant African snails. They're now naturalized in a small place like Sikkim. So the fallout, for the farming communities, which are very full of traditional knowledge, that is going to be severely affected. Already we are facing this. The new age farmers, young entrepreneurs are trying different techniques to overcome this. But the older generation is almost giving up farming because of all these issues. So when we depend more and more on fresh water, and we are talking about this issue, when we are talking about the third pole, after Antarctic and Arctic, we are the ones with water. And today we are talking of water stress. Today we are talking of the irony, the irony cannot just be brought to.
Thank you, Misha, for that insight. Yes, please.
I make this argument, if you study, a lot of studies have been done about first and the second pole, or the Antarctic and Arctic. Actually, the third pole is more important than Arctic and Arctic, because when the glaciers or the ice of Arctic and Arctic melt, it goes to ocean. It becomes salt water. It's not drinkable. The glaciers of Tibetan plants, when it melts, it becomes water, drinkable. Right? So it's more important. So a lot less study is being done about it. Now, Sikkim is a microcosm of what's happening on the Tibetan plateau. because Tibet has 46,000 glaciers. Sikkim is talking about a few hundreds. 46,000 glaciers. Now the key date is 2030. By 2030, there will be more melting of glaciers than the replacement. So from 2030 onwards, glaciers of Tibet start melting and it won't be replaced by the same amount. Till now, we used to have excess of replacement. So we get plenty of water. Now 2030 is starting, which is in 6 years' time. Now what would people do downstream? Because glaciers are melting very fast. And the Tibetan plateau is also 70% permafrost, frozen earth, meaning it's snow, or again, ice under the soil. But then when the climate change becomes real, which is real, global warming heats up, the permafrost starts melting. For the time being, you will have water, but underneath permafrost, you have methane. Methane is anywhere from 28 times more potent than carbon dioxide, or 100 times more potent if measured in 20 years' time. So that scientists can explain. What it means is that the pollution of this area, this region, and the global warming will expedite. And the glacier will melt faster, air pollution will be more severe, and all this will affect people downstream. So Tibetan plateau, when you talk about glaciers melting and water scarcity, without studying the Tibetan plateau, you can't understand fully. That's why you ask the question, what can be done? We need better access to Tibet. More scientists, independent scientists should have unfettered access. Now, if you go to Tibet or China, it's controlled. They will take you to particular places. You're allowed to do limited research, and you can publish only limited findings. That's why Arctic is more popular. They get more funding because it's politically neutral. Everybody's allowed to go in the sense if you're a scientist. But on the Tibetan plateau, Tibet, you are not. That is hampering. So that's why we need to have a coordinated approach and push this forward. If you don't understand the Tibetan plateau, you don't understand global warming or climate change in this area, and for all of Asia as well.
Thank you for that, Dr. Lobsang. Again, the kind of damage and loss that both Dr. Usha and Dr. Lobsang has talked about, it comes to finance. It's all about investment, and it's about money and how you're going to sort of be able to mitigate or adapt to these changes or do research on these changes. So I think since you come from that field, and then recently we were discussing it at our table that although they've increased per year amount from 100 billion to about 300 billion only for the transition, that part, and then I think it's in trillions, like our keynote speakers, unimaginable amount of money, especially for us who come from this region and many times also get left out in the mainstream planning for climate change mitigation and adaptation. So for that, I just want to ask you a very generic question, Mr. Roy, about what are some of the investments that can be prioritized, and also because you are talking about the last mile efforts that is needed, and also changing the narrative coming from the people who own these resources, own these lands, and come from these lands. What do you think of this?
So. I'll be very short given the time. It's a PhD subject. But one of the good news is that in this region, the architecture to get green finance, architecture to get climate financing is at a stage where it's evolving. That's where it is anything. So we probably over the next few years have an opportunity to give it shape so that it doesn't have these blind spots that maybe some other architectures have. So that's where we are. But to my mind, I think there are the obvious ones for deployment, which is greater scientific penetration, greater penetration of scientific knowledge, and enabling. To my mind, I think there also has to be better enabling regulatory ecosystem, which recognize the third pole as a third pole, and maybe even constitutional provisions around that. Those needs of investment. But again, from a last mile perspective. again, I speak as someone who's worked extensively in the aftermath of most of the disasters that you were talking about, and I recognize that completely. And in the area, one is languages. I think no one speaks about languages as a means of expression. I think the number of languages that the region may have lost, you don't express as means of expression. It's not prioritized, but I think it's critical because there are limits to English, there are limits to languages. Certain wisdom, certain know-how can only get expressed in these certain languages. And how do you sort of build them up? That's number one. Education. How do you penetrate climate education into schools and younger things? Because we actually have a generation currently in schools, in some of the media schools and colleges, who are growing up with the adverse effects of climate change. Many of us have stumbled onto the adverse effects of climate change. So I think that consciousness exists and that needs direction. I think we do some work with Terry on the subject, and I think there's modules that are around. So, but I think that needs much greater investment. I don't see enough in the syllabus of various boards in the country on this. And the third piece is, like I said, ecological entrepreneurship. But I think there's a thin line because it's good. But ultimately, from a conservation, the only caveat there is, I think, most livelihoods tend to start asking the saving investment question more than the conservation question beyond a certain point. That's a thin line. So these are three things.
Thank you.
Can I add one? This UN Convention on Water Sharing, which China has, conveniently not signed. I think the countries downstream should say, China is obligated to sign UN Convention on Water Sharing. Then they are obligated now, whether they abide by UN Convention or not, that's a different matter. But they must at least sign it. Two, there are environmental laws in China, right? That has to be implemented, right? And there have to be, environmentalists have to make them accountable. Third, how to protect third, Chinese environmentalists have declared Tibet as the third pole nature reserve. Because Chinese are coming up. This is 2015 report. They're saying Tibet plateau is so important for Chinese people. This is the source of our waterhead. Right? So important for us that we must declare as third pole nature reserve, which is similar to what the Solanus Dalai said, like Zora Peace, or largest nature reserve for man and animals. Right? So these are the solutions are already there within China, and also proposed by Solanus Dalai and UN Convention on Water Sharing that PRC should be obligated to follow and implement.
Thank you. Dear audience, please don't think us to be doomsday people. We are people with optimism, and with that, I will ask my panelists at the end as a wrapping up question. What is one, optimistic thing you still feel about this region, Dr. Usha, despite all the, things that are happening?
The gloom and doom scenario is there to stay, but the best part of it is the younger generation is actually, who's facing the brunt of it. We are already on the other side of 60, so we will not be facing that. But it's the young generation who knows what they are stepping into, and the more dialogue we have like this, the more they will be aware. And it's very nice to see, the audience here itself is young, and the organizers, everybody, the kind of passion that we are seeing in the younger generation. Even in Sikkim itself, a small place like Sikkim, we are finding more and more young, new age farmers. They want to try new ideas. They understand the issues. So I have a lot of faith and a positive feeling that the younger generation is going to take this forward in a better way than we did.
Thank you, Dr. Lobsang. In one sentence, please.
Only one sentence, Dr. Himalaya. I was invited to the 2017 Balipara Foundation same event. The turnover was, I think, 100 people. Now look at it as increased, right? So more people paying attention. But I said, I'm Buddhist. So in life, we know there's birth, there's optimism, there's death, there's doom. We all will die. Right? But how Buddhists look at life is like Hindus. Because we will die. While you live, what you do matters. So while you live, you keep fighting and you keep living. And again, as a Buddhist, it's 2,600 years old. I don't want to politicize the discourse, but Buddhism is 100 years old. So we have been there for thousands of years, so we'll be there for thousands of years, so no worries.
Thank you. What about you? What is your one optimistic comment?
यहाँ भी बच्चे हैं और बहुत सारी चीजें बच्चे हैं. So the answers actually lie here. Answers lie here, and it's for us to discover it and prioritize the right things. But the answers lie here. वो तो बच्चे हैं.
Thank you. With that, we come to the close of this panel discussion. Thank you so much to all the three panelists for your wonderful insights. And thank you for everyone for taking a keen interest and listening to all of us. Thank you. Sorry,